of what we were seeing and what we were hearing from you. And certainly if you look at this, and these things are bigger because they were things that bubbled to the surface of interest for folks. We know that it's a direction we need to go in, but we don't really know yet exactly how to calculate the value, what the investment needs and opportunities are, and are looking for some more real numbers in this area. So we wanted to take an opportunity on a virtual roundtable today to kind of give you a perspective on where we stand currently with this, where our thinking currently is, and what we're going to be doing over the next few months to move the ball forward in this area. Some folks from the Department of Energy may be on the phone today as well, but these were some things that we heard specifically from some one-to-one interviews that we did with builders from home building companies earlier on in the year, and there were 20 production home building companies, and they were all senior level people, CEOs, senior vice presidents, presidents of these organizations. Some would say what you would imagine, which is that top left quote, a panelized frame costs as much, if not more, than a stick-built frame, and we're not really going to argue with that. That may very well be true. But others had some broader insights to share. Some folks in that bright green bubble, the only way to accurately calculate value is to look beyond cost per house. So that's something that we've been trying to do internally at the Alliance with the help of Ibicus, and Glenn Cottrell is sitting in the room today. He's been helping out with the research that we've been doing in this area, putting together a calculator that we're going to go through today. But we do need more realistic models, and we need some more actual case study examples. So that's really what we're working toward as an organization. So for today's call, we want to give you a snapshot of where we stand right now, where our thinking is. So we're going to talk a bit about business models and calculating value. Some work in process that we have really, which is collaborative innovation. So what we're looking at in terms of case study development, what we'll be doing November 15th at our roundtable event in Baltimore, and then what we intend our outcomes to be from that, and how we would expand this conversation into 2019 and beyond as well. So just wanted to throw that to your attention in terms of how we're going to roll things out today. I'm Betsy Scott, again, for those of you who don't know me. I'm one of the executive directors for the Alliance. The other executive director, Rachel Kelly, is sitting right next to me, and I'm really focused on the program. So I'm working with George and Michael and Margaret and other experts and Glenn to help drive some of these key topic areas. Margaret, I'm sure many of you know her, is a finance expert, and she's got quite a bit of background in helping put some of the deals together that are happening right now with the off-site providers. So she has some good insight on the business model side in that way as well. And then, of course, George, our chairman, has been in the industry for 30, 40 odd years and had been an executive in the operations level within building organizations, and also has an MBA from Wharton in finance. So he's particularly adept at looking at the financial aspects of this as well. So before we dig into things deeper, I just want to take a moment for those of you who are on the phone who are our partners, and for those who might watch this later as our partners, to thank them for their support in making this type of research and programming possible. And those are our transformation partners as well as our catalyst partners. And we can't do events like this and share insights like this without you. So just wanted to give you a shout out before we dig in. So first, we're going to look at really how we're currently looking at delayering finance from a business model and a cost calculator perspective. So in November of last year, we did talk in kind of 3 tracks at the first roundtable that we did on the subject. And one of the tracks was components. Certainly the smaller pieces, either they're prefabricated individual smaller pieces that are then shipped to the job site, or things like ready frame that's pre-cut and shipped to the job site. We also talked about 2D panelization, as well as modular. And the whole thought here is, this is a continuum and it's going to depend on the builder and their partners where they land in this process and how sophisticated they get. But regardless, there are three real considerations that need to be made from the business model perspective. The first of which is ownership. Is it something you're taking ownership of yourself and internalizing, building your own factory? Is it something that you're outsourcing, that you're arriving at through partnerships? What are the impacts on process? And then what are the impacts from a technology and engineering perspective? Today and in November, we're going to focus more on the panelization side, more in the advanced but not fully modular end of the spectrum, because that's really where we're seeing builders' interest. But this really truly is a continuum. And I'm going to take the opportunity, since we've got two folks who are a lot smarter about this than I am on the phone, to ask both Margaret and George to give us their thoughts on the big picture behind the investment in off-site construction and various approaches that you could take in the process. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Margaret on that front first.
Sure. Thank you, Betsy. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
You're great. Perfect.
Good. I really enjoy these webinars, and I appreciate being included. I think it's a good idea just to look at where we are in our housing cycle right now, in our economic cycle. I think it's important to note that a lot has changed over the last decade since the downturn. Our industry has always been very cyclical. Up to half of the employee base could get laid off every 5 or 6 years, so it hasn't been that attractive an industry to work in. I think that's changing and improving right now. In particular, over the last 20 years, we've seen the college enrollment rate in the U.S. jump to 70 from 50, and some of those young people are actually learning skills and talents that they can bring into our industry. Because we didn't have a lot of skilled labor, and because we have a cyclical nature to our business, we have always relied heavily on immigrants, often undocumented workers, who would build up a skill set over time and a rate of efficiency, but of course that was lost each time we had a downturn. We know right now that the labor constraints are rife across the country. We know this is the biggest challenge that's on the mind. Most of the builders and construction companies are all around the U.S., whatever price point of type of product that we're building. We also know that right now we're underbuilding relative to historic peaks and averages, but the question remains in terms of how we can increase supply when affordability is constrained already. We can't really afford to charge more for houses. In fact, houses have to get smaller and more cost efficient, so we can't afford to pay more for labor and pass that along. I do believe that the labor challenge is not cyclical anymore. I think it's secular. I think we have to work hard to attract talent into our industry, and really necessity breeds invention. That's where we are right now. I think the good news is that there are so many products and processes that are available to address this. Some of them are new to us, some of them are new to the U.S., but many have been tested and proven overseas, so we don't have to take a lot of risk to get these processes into the U.S. system. In fact, we know that both NVR and Toll have done a really nice job for decades now of pre-cutting some of their framing components off-site. And both of those, or each of those companies, represents a very different type of product. Toll being higher end, more options and upgrades in the process, NVR being a simpler product that's easier to repeat in that controlled factory environment. I do believe that 2018 is the inflection point. I think the change has to be meaningful from here. It's too late for it to be iterative. And my personal view is that the third parties that are going to sponsor these initiatives, the companies that are most at risk of being displaced. And for example, we've seen a couple of significant investments in the last year. The first one was CertainTeed, an insulation company investing in Unity Homes, one of the Alliance members that spoke to us at the summit last year. Another one was Louisiana Pacific, a global engineered wood products company that invested in Integra, a European team with an integrated offsite solution. And then the third was Kingspan, which is a European insulation company that invested in a BIM company in Vicara. So I think that the change will be meaningful. I think the adoption rate will be very high. I think the fact that most of these products and processes have been proven overseas gives us an awful lot of comfort that as they do come into our process over here, that they will be well received and time and cost efficient. I think when we're talking about all of these different changes, we should lay out a framework because there's so much of it that's happening on a spectrum. I personally believe that modular manufactured housing will be a bigger part of the total going forward, but it's growing off a small base. I think it's a nice, efficient solution for many new homeowners. But I think off-site solution, open frame, panel, what traditional stick builders in the U.S. have been doing for years, is where we're going to see the most improvement going forward and where there's the most opportunity to improve. A couple of the processes that we've heard a lot about for the last year or two reference VITS or FIOS. VITS, vertically integrated total solution, is a process that's been very popular in Central Florida, actually for nearly 20 years. It's offered by a company called RCI, Rainey Construction. And what I love about Buddy Rainey and what he's been doing is he's improved his business model, working for home builders around the country, national builders for the last 20 plus years. What I really admire about it is he builds the house twice. And the first time is online in 3D to rationalize the process, eliminate the waste, find the bottlenecks and remove them. And then secondly, on site, he'll fly in the trusses with a crane, and that takes 10 days out of the traditional 14-day cycle. So it makes the house weatherproof more quickly, less availability for risk in the timing of the process, for waste, for weather damage, for theft, because it's weatherproof so quickly. The Integra team in California is offering a very similar process and product. They call it FIOS, Fully Integrated Offsite Solution. And what's unique about the LP Integra investment is that LP had worked with the Integra team previously when the Integra team was known as Century Homes in Europe. So there's a lot of overlap in what we're doing and what we can do here in the U.S. relative to what's being done overseas, with very little risk from an integration or an adoption rate in my mind. I do think the process with these offsite solutions companies is not just efficient from a framing perspective, but they also pre-cut for services so that the next step, the insulators, the plumbing, the electricians going in can move more quickly and more smoothly. And actually, I've talked to some of the Rainey customers in Central Florida who said that they can take 10 plus days out of a 100-day bill cycle. That's more than 10%. So when you think about it from a cash flow perspective, if they have a 100-day cycle and they build houses twice a year relative to the work days in an annual period, they can increase their cash flow and their closings by as much as 20% every 12 months. I think that's very meaningful. The other thing that's interesting is not just these processes that are coming to the U.S., but also some of the products. And I had an opportunity recently to spend some time with KB Home. They are partnered with Integra, which is designing and framing the IBS Show House 2019. I'm actually looking forward to seeing that house when I'm in Vegas next week. But they brought in a new product on the interior insulation side called CoolFirm, which is sold by Kingspan here in the U.S., and it's a pre-cut insulation board that goes on the interior of the wall frame, but it can be assembled, again, in that controlled environment in the factory and then installed on site. So it's taking a lot of time and cost out of the cycle, but it's still very energy efficient, which is important, especially out on the West Coast where we're moving towards the zero net energy efficiency goals. I think another good example of a product versus a process is Hercuol, which is being manufactured in Tempe, Arizona. It was introduced to the market a couple of years ago at the Builders Show, and it's a panelized wall system that's reinforced with concrete. So It's pre-cut in a factory, it's installed on the site, it's taking a lot of days out of the cycle. It's also taking some product out of the cycle because it's an insulated wall. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here to manage costs, to manage time, that ultimately help improve affordability, which is the biggest challenge in the industry right now, making housing affordable to our consumers. I'll end by saying that everyone's worried about the cyclical nature of the business and where we might be in the cycle, but I actually think that we have a lot of room for growth, even though we're 8 or 9 years into the recovery, depending on the market that you're in. I do think we have a lot of room for growth from here. There's very little supply in the market. The biggest challenge is building on time and on budget, and I think these processes and products that we're talking about, they're innovative, are really going to allow for that.
Great, thank you, Margaret. That was a lot of fantastic information. But George, do you have anything to add on that front from a business model perspective, bigger picture?
I do, Betsy. And by the way, thank you everyone for coming into the webinar today. To build on what Margaret is talking about, when you think about the entire industry has grown up on a business model that basically has almost all the work being done by subcontractors that change both their workforces, and builders change subcontractors more frequently than we would like. However, it's a risk-adverse model because it takes most of the building the house and makes it a variable cost. So in the cycle, you can cut down your labor and material costs very quickly because it's subcontracted. On the other hand, what's given up in that whole thing is the ability to improve processes. And that now is coming back to bear, that if you look at the problems that we deal with in terms of building houses right now are mostly process problems. And my thought is that we may be on a direction that starts taking this world of 50 or 60 trade contractors involved in building a house and going in a direction towards more of what I would call super subs, which would be involved with large pieces of the house being performed by companies that are way more financially capable and sophisticated than the current subcontractor base typically is right now. And so I look at the things we're talking about here as being a step along that path, because I keep looking, if everybody has been using the same business model and we haven't been getting any kind of real productivity improvement, then maybe, as Jerry McCaughey at Integra would say, the problem is the process that we're using and we need a different one. And these various attempts that are going at it, both from a material standpoint and from whether it's FIOS or the others, it really involves a different process that Margaret alluded to, which is really building the house using 3D BIM software up front, so that you're taking a lot of the potential problems in building that we leave to the superintendent of trades to work out in the field and actually working them out on a computer. And it's the integration of the trades and the thinking in doing this stuff that actually makes the difference and allows the production of the components, whether they be modular or componentized or panelized or whatever, to be much more efficient and the waste to be way less. The second point is that Margaret alluded to was that it's not just in the labor and materials for putting up the shell of the house. This process of thinking and building the house online or on a computer has knock-on effects with both time and waste for subsequent trades, whether they be electricians, plumbers, mechanical, or whether it might be drywall. Think of the times that you get a house framed up and the lumber used in it is bad and you have to be ripping out interior studs before you can drywall. A lot of these things disappear when you start doing stuff internally. So I think if I come back and finish my thought, it's really, we're into a situation where we're going to have to be focusing on processes and how to make that more important, but that's along a path to probably a consolidation inside of the subcontractor side of the industry into maybe 4 or 5 super subs who are the people that you actually use to build a house. So with that, we'll keep going, Betsy.
Okay, thanks, George, and Margaret, both. So the next part of this, just to kind of give you a sense of where we've been before we talk about where we're going. I don't expect you to be able to read this eye chart here. This is actually just that's a screen grab of the Excel document that I sent to you earlier this morning. But earlier this year, kind of in response to what we were hearing from everyone looking for real numbers behind the financials, more of a consistent methodology for getting to that data, we worked internally. Glenn Cottrell at Ibicus helped lead that effort for us. With Michael and Margaret and George and myself and some others inputting on it to say, if we were to create a tool that we could use to start trying to document this, what metrics should we be covering in that tool, and how could it function to allow people to start side-by-side comparisons between numbers. So it was developed in March, April timeframe this year, and Glenn shared it with everyone at the Innovation Summit. We had some good case study information from Buddy Rainey, just from his perspective as a provider, from Integra, along with one of their customers there as well. But it was really the beta version of this, and we did get some good feedback afterward and have made some revisions to the tool since then. But the game plan at this point is to move forward with taking the tool and using it to apply it to more real-world scenarios and look at case study applications for that tool. Our goal is to get a couple in place for our roundtable in November that's going to be in the Baltimore region, as well as continuing that discussion through to 2019 to the Innovation Summit that we're hosting in out in Scottsdale. I almost said Phoenix again. But in general, the premise of this is that, the thought behind this is that you can complete more homes with fewer workers in less time. So the idea is to capture the cost data that purchasing managers, may traditionally capture, as well as some more of the subtle details that actually give more of the rich data behind the true cost, as well as some additional savings and value that you can get out of it. So I sent you guys the spreadsheet to take a look at. I am just going to give you a very high-level snapshot of what's in it, and then see if you guys we'll open the floor to our first round of questions for this afternoon and see if you guys have any thoughts on here as well. But in addition to the standard direct costs here, when we look in the directs under framing, insulation, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, and job site cleanup, we're also looking at what are the reductions that you can get in material waste. How much material do you save by doing things more precisely off-site, no matter what methodology you're using? How much do you save in terms of materials that aren't stolen from sitting around on the job site? Variance purchase orders, how many variance purchase orders do you have today with on-site construction, and how can that be impacted and rework be lessened and changes be less because you've done more forethought and planning to get to the off-site construction process. So really looking at a broader scope of what the cost and the potential savings might be in this area. And predominantly in the sketch that we sent to you, it was a sample of how to apply the tool. It wasn't a real-world example, but it was just to give you a sense of how to use it. And in that scenario, the only thing that was impacted was it was open, and correct me if I'm wrong, Glenn, it was just open wall panelization, and nothing was impacted in terms of insulation or any of the other mechanicals, but the tool is designed so that as changes are made, you can actually plug the numbers in for the areas that are affected.
Yes, quite simply, the version that you sent out today, Betsy, with respect to the numbers, are simply reflective of an open wall panel solution that's delivered to a job site and erected on site. No insulation, no mechanicals in those wall panels. If your off-site solution provider is going beyond just framing, then you would go in and do a on-site versus off-site evaluation for those additional components. So we've tried to just set this up, at least as a framework of a calculator, to be flexible depending upon what the builder and provider package includes.
Perfect. And then we've heard, and I think George mentioned this earlier in a different context at the business model level, but we've also heard that there are also ripple effects in cycle time savings that you can achieve when you implement an off-site solution. So cycle time is another component here that we're looking at under each of these sections to document what those changes are. Then the next section is really moving into what people don't typically look at necessarily, at least the people we've talked to get a sense of how they're calculating cost benefit at this point. So some of the more indirect costs, like we talked about material waste, but if you have less material waste, how many fewer dumpsters can you be pulling from those job sites? What's the impact on general and administrative expenses and interest and carrying costs? So these are some of the things that are also impacted that should be considered, and data, frankly, that will come from different areas within your business than your purchasing team, likely, at that point. And then ultimately, in this scenario, ultimately, I didn't need that part. In this scenario, the thought here with that simplified solution, just the panels themselves, is that the materials, the direct savings opportunity, you're actually in the red. So this does acknowledge that sometimes that happens. But ultimately, if you're looking at both the direct savings and the indirect savings, it gives you a fuller picture as to what the total impact is from a value perspective. So in this scenario, it's $3,350 more on construction, but when you look at the savings, the indirect savings, it's $3,800, so it's a net change of $467 per house, which if you're a builder, you know you're always looking for that, how many $50 can I get out of the doorknobs and the, you know, how much can I take out of my insulation costs? $467 can add up fairly quickly when you start multiplying it by the number of homes that you're delivering. So that's just a snapshot there. So we're interested also in seeing what might be missing. And Glenn and I had an opportunity to chat the other day, and actually this came up in my mind because of a case study that we had with a client of Tim Beckman's, and I think you're on the phone, Tim, from CG Vision. So Matt from Allen Edwin Homes in Michigan was talking about how they were using BIM to get their processes to be more efficient. And in implementing BIM, they had the initial investment, but they were actually able to, over the course of a few years, cut their estimating staff in half. So the thought here was, if that happens with BIM, can't we have a similar effect in terms of looking at site supervisors? So I pulled some data that Glenn had created back when we were doing another research program called Cost of Quality, looking at quality management. And Glenn, you had given these data points that the average number of homes carried when you were talking to builders was, if they were top 20 builder, a site supervisor would carry 25 homes. And if they were a regional builder, they might carry 15 to 20. So, and then if you look at the salary for that person, that's another $100,000. So if you're able to scale up in volume while not having to add additional staff, that's also something that we haven't looked at this point. Is that a fair statement? Any thoughts on that front, Glenn?
There is some truth to that. there is in the indirects line item of the calculator, your average general and administrative, which is where these costs, the salary costs would go in there. So to some extent, I think the calculator captures some of it, but not all of it. And I would just pose that there's other areas, not just your construction oversight staff, but some of the other areas that are indirects to consider, harder perhaps to quantify and attribute back to your off-site construction processes. But higher quality of this product, potentially fewer warranty claims, may at some point get that recognized by your insurance carriers and lower general liability coverage, potentially fewer customer service people because you have fewer customer service claims, better quality product leading to higher customer satisfaction, which can translate into more referrals. Again, harder to quantify, but if you work hard enough at it, you can tie these things back to bottom line business impact. So yes, I do believe shorter cycle times, if you are able to maintain that volume and you have shorter cycle times, you should be able to build that same volume with less oversight.
There was a question that was pulled into the mix, and jointly perhaps we can tackle this, but it says, are you considering the potential change in sales margin on materials, lumber in particular, from the distributor or the manufacturer? Often builders price shop distributors for the lowest cost framing materials. Manufacturers have to account for design labor, manufacturing equipment, overhead, as well as handling. So I personally don't know how to answer that. Do you have any thoughts, Glenn or George or Margaret or even Michael, on that front?
Yeah.
Was that George?
No, that was Margaret.
Oh, that was Margaret? Okay.
I know you're muting me, Betsy. It's a good question, and it's one of the challenges that George referred to, which is the fact that we build homes like a relay race, and we pass the baton on and on and on, and there's an incremental cost with each stage. In terms of the lumber, one of the things that's attractive about the way Rainey sells the process is he charges per house an installed product. So say, call it $50,000 per house. That's both the lumber and the labor. So the builder's actually deferring the risk over to the framer, or the super framer, the super contractor, as George would call him. One of the reasons it's challenging to make changes like this is because framers are often getting a markup on the lumber that they're buying, and it's also one of the reasons I believe there's so much waste, because they're not motivated to cut down on the waste. They're selling a marked up product, and the more they sell, the more profit they have. So I think when you reduce the number of hands that the baton is getting passed through, that's one way to make it cost efficient. And I don't know if the person who asked the question has any thoughts on that answer.
No, Betsy, I actually have something. Having done this several times in my career, yes, you've got these costs of if you call it the factory and those kinds of things that get passed through. And the way that I found best to operate was really taking a cue from either Boeing or the large auto manufacturers and so on, which was really a different relationship that we had with, if I call it, our super subs, that we did a total open book, that we basically wanted to make sure that our partner made a reasonable profit that was consistent with the risk they were taking. And those are part of the negotiations we had up front. But what we also were doing is very much integrating with each other to look for chances to make processes even better, costs lower. And that was the difference in mindset. Rather than one of everything's hidden behind the curtain, it was one that was really brought up front in terms of working together. The issue when you have multiple trades, those relationships are hard to manage. And if you actually have fewer and you deal with them over a longer time, it really is a much different relationship that is somewhat uncommon but not unheard of inside of our industry.
Okay, great insights. Thank you. And if anyone else has any questions throughout the process, just use the chat function. Natalie's helping me monitor any questions that you have, and we'll just keep going on. So that was the base case again that we shared with you. That's based on 250 homes a year. There's a link to this that you'll get also when you get the slide deck following the call. That will actually take you to the article that explains this base case in detail. So if you wanted to look at any more of the details related to how we use the calculator just in this little fictitious scenario to get a sense of how it works, you will be able to do that as well. And we touched on that part already. I am just going to, in the interest of time, keep going, and we'll monitor the questions that you guys have and just interject them as they come along. So here on the next couple of slides for you, moving forward, we're looking to develop case studies in this area. So take real world information and plug it into the calculator. Well, what does that mean? There's great thought that's been put into the calculator to date, and some good fields, and it actually is set up that it will do calculations for you if you use the Excel version of it. But where and how do you get the data? So our intent is to work with folks to get a couple of base cases that we can look at that are with real world numbers. And so we've taken the calculator and tried to delayer it in terms of questions that you could pose internally as a builder, as well as the potential sources for that information. And I think it's, at least from what I've heard, both on the supplier side, and when I say supplier, I mean off-site solution provider side, as well as some of the builders that we've spoken with, I think there is an opportunity to get a lot of data and information from different departments within a builder's organization. I've taken the first step myself, so this is me throwing this out there, and it's totally up for debate and change and so forth, to say if we were to answer each of these questions and move toward filling this calculator, who are the people that we would need to engage within a builder's business. So that this would be a different way for you to look at the data that's within the calculator that might spur ideas among you to say, here's something that I think, here's a metric I think we're missing, or a question that we're not currently asking, or a team within a builder's business or partner that we should be engaging that we aren't. So that's just what you'll see on these next couple of slides here. And then the intent is to get a couple of those case studies together for our November event as well as for the summit next year, and use the opportunity to actually get additional feedback from you and to refine the calculator moving forward. So we see this as kind of the 2.0 development process to dig into numbers more deeply. So if you are, and I'm going to throw a question to you, George and Margaret, so if you're to do a true cost-benefit analysis of an off-site solution, what departments do you think that a builder would need to engage within their business in that process? I've thrown some out here. Are they right? Are there others?
Yeah, Betsy, this is George. So I think I have this phrase that I use, that organizations tend to do the things they're organized to do. And that if you're not organized to do it, it's very hard to do it. In this case, what you're looking at is an overall area that you might call manufacturing engineering, or more likely process control and improvement. And the issue with most home builders, if you go to their org charts, there's no one that has this kind of function, whose job is to look at overall processes and how they improve, because the processes go across multiple departments inside of both the builder, but also go across your trade partners. The successes that I've had personally as an operator and as a consultant are when you change the organization to have people that begin to look at these things holistically, is when you actually start getting performance. To think that you can get meaningful change without somebody responsible for that change is probably folly. So the first thing I would say is you need to think about how you're organized.
Okay.
So if you think of this as Michael, think about that. I'm sure NVR has a different organization structure, a corporate, than a BESA or a KOF.
Mm-hmm.
And Keith Fells at the summit did a phenomenal job sharing what they do there at Toll.
Mm-hmm.
That's because to George's point, he's specifically designed
Right.
in the organization to own that productivity. Some of these questions, the good thing is we go in after them. The bad thing is it might be hard to get answers.
True.
Keep going, don't stop.
Yeah. Anything to add on that front, Margaret?
Yeah, what I would add is that I do think it's going to be the independent third parties that bring these solutions to the builders, rather than the unique cases where, like you referenced, Keith Fell being a terrific addition to the Toll team or NVR's process. They've both been very successful with offsite for decades, and the builders in general haven't copied them. If they have, sometimes they faltered, like Pulte Home Sciences. So I think it's more likely to be the really smart products companies like Louisiana Pacific with Entegra, like BMC with ReadyFrame. That's a product that's been very well received by the market because it's addressing a challenge with a solution, which is pre-cutting the lumber and being a part of a solution with a builder and getting around a bottleneck. I'll tell you that a funny anecdote that I have, I've been working with a master plan developer in Central Florida, and one of the builders in that master plan is a Rainey customer and the others are not. And in a completely unrelated conversation, unrelated to the subject of innovation, the person who's running that master plan called me to have a conversation and said, I wanted to pick your brain about something. We've got 2 top 5 national builders in the master plan, and one is closing one house a week, and one is closing one house a month. What do you think the difference is? And it's Rainey. It's the Rainey customer that's just so much more efficient. And when you think about the bottom line improvement and the return on capital, working capital improvement, I think that the builders that embrace and are successful with these solutions will see the benefits very quickly, and that'll help them to focus more on the opportunity versus the risk in making these changes.
So we've had a bigger builder. Suggest something here, pose a question here, saying that they're judged by Wall Street in terms of margins. Will they be able to justify the investment in moving toward offsite, since typically, they're looking at those numbers on the top end, as we looked in this scenario, and they're seeing that the framing costs more, or they're seeing that the direct costs are more. So they're questioning whether they would be able to justify the investment to the Wall Street folks using our fancy math, if you will, that we have in the calculator. So I don't know if you guys have any, since you're both financial minds, if you guys have any thought on that perspective as well.
I'll let Margaret go first, and then I'll follow up.
I think that the net cost and the value of this tool is that it allows you to see the net cost as opposed to the upfront cost or the direct cost, Betsy. The total net cost is lower because when you have a kit that's pre-cut and all the kinks are taken out of it, reduces the amount of lumber needed and the waste in the lumber, and then you have installed via crane. So you have a trained driver, crane operator, and you have 2 or 3 skilled framers installing it over a couple of days versus more skilled framers over a couple of weeks. The ratio of skilled to unskilled is higher. Skilled carpenters more than 2x the cost of a factory worker. Factory workers can work in a more controlled environment, so they're less likely to have weather delays. They're not moving from job site to job site every couple of weeks or months. They're really getting more efficient. So I think that the builders will see the benefit of it very quickly, but I also believe that it's going to be the third parties, the product companies, that actually invest in this, because in doing so, they can leverage the investment or the risk across several customers, several builders in a market. There's definitely a limitation to a factory from a distance perspective. After 250 or 300 miles, it gets cost prohibitive, and there's a risk of damage. So how many builders can justify the upfront $15–20 million needed to build a factory because they're building enough houses within that 250-mile radius every year? It might be low, especially through a cycle, but a third party could do so if they have a couple of builder customers.
Yep. Yeah, I'm going to add on just a little bit, going back to the question of the analyst view. I think all of this has to be in the context of a story, a strategy, and why you're doing it. I think there's probably no doubt that the business model that we have been using, that relied on a lot of undocumented labor, cyclical labor, and not much improvement in process, people know that's wrong. And if I were a CEO, I'd be flat out telling my analysts and the public that we can't go on living like this, that we have to do something different. And this isn't like going to the moon. It's been done in other parts of the world. It's actually being done in parts of our country. But unless we make this kind of a change to become more technologically efficient, to be starting to solve this labor problem that just isn't going away, we can begin to position ourselves as a company that is there for the future. And those who don't position have the risk of being buggy whip manufacturers, and we don't want to be that.
Or blockbusters.
Or blockbusters. But
Yeah.
It has to be done in this context that, yeah, there may be some pain early on as you're making the transition. But I go back, I think Keith Fella's on the line here. You know, all I know is NVR and Toll are two very sharp pencil outfits. And if it wasn't making sense, long ago they would have gone back to the old way of doing it. They haven't. And to me, that is the test that's happened that says it works, but you have to work at it. It just doesn't automatically happen. There's a million things you have to change in terms of your business processes, the way you think about things, the way you organize. But if you do them, you begin to inoculate yourself against the risks of the future where labor disappears, and you begin to position yourself to actually be more productive. And I go back to my old DuPont formula, you get a higher return on assets than most builders are getting right now. And that overall financially is good down the pike for investors, employees, and customers. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
There's Michael again. I had a couple of points. I'm not beating up the industry when I say this, but the McKinsey report that shows where our industry stands in the productivity list, nearly bottom, if not bottom. What we've done over 20 years with labor from other countries has been amazing. The production plants out in the field in the high growth areas, unbelievable. Most of those days, though, have gone. We got an affordability issue, as Margaret highlighted. The only way we're going to solve it is with more of this. Mm-hmm. But I really have an issue for most builders if they think they're going to invest in their own plants. I think partnerships, you know, the auto world, the computer world, Nike, no one invests in all their own plants to the level. Mm-hmm. So I think it's about partnerships. Some of the big guys who have the volume can warrant it, but I think George hit it. It's partnerships. Partnerships with third parties, super suppliers, extend the product manufacturing guys, which you're starting to see, you know, with BMC and others. I think that's the way, you know, this partnership needs to work. No one has the tools, back to your point. Get them the tool.
Yeah, that's what we're working on. So I'm just going to kind of close out. We've got about 9 minutes or so left to just give you a high level of where we're headed. Hope that everybody's on the call today is able to make it to Baltimore in November. On the 15th, we're going to do another roundtable event in Baltimore in Fells Point. at the Pendry Hotel. And we're actually going to do a site visit to Blueprint Robotics while we're there as well. If you were at our event last November, it's the same general format, but this time we are going to offer some tours at the Blueprint factory in the afternoon on the 14th before we do our networking event in the evening. It's a smaller factory, but very advanced. I'm going to show you some pictures in a moment. So they like smaller groups, but to get the maximum people involved, we're going to do tours the end of the afternoon on the 14th and first thing in the morning on the 15th. The evening of the 14th, we'll do a pre-event networking reception, and then we'll do an optional dinner the evening of the 15th as well. So if you go on the tour in the afternoon and you stay over and want to continue to connect with folks, you'll be able to do that over dinner. And there are registration forms both for the event itself and for the dinner. The networking event's included, but the dinner is separate. If you're interested in that, you buy a separate ticket for that event. But here's a snapshot of Blueprint, and if we were looking at that continuum, I would say they are closed wall panels, and they have a lot of the pre-work done for mechanical systems. Michael had the opportunity to go to their factory, take a tour of it earlier this year, but they're using all the whiz-bang robotic equipment, BIM modeling, a lot of prefabrication as well as the windows and some exterior sheathing in the factory, and then shipping that out to people, I believe, within 200 to 250 miles.
Yeah, and they've extended that using boats because they've got the harbor. But good relationships with suppliers.
Yep. So
here you can see some of their wiring harnesses. They're smart. Very good start they've made the last couple of years.
Right, so, and they're going to be expanding. I don't know the details of that yet, but Jerry Smaley is their CEO. He's in the bottom left there. He'll be able to share some of those details with us at that site tour as well. And then we'll dig more deeply into the nature of things that we talked about today with a larger group, the business model aspect of it from a finance perspective, as well as looking at the calculator. And I would charge anyone who's on the phone with looking at those calculator and those questions that I sent to you. And if you think there's something missing, we'd love to get feedback between now and November so we can adjust what we're talking about on site. But we're going to do table-based think tanks, and we'll also elevate the discussion back up to the rest of the room. But ultimately, our intent with this is to develop more of a methodology that we can use to look at as an industry, off-site construction cost-benefit analysis, but also some tools that our members and partners will be able to use within their businesses. So this is just a very quick page snapshot of the members and partners only section of our website. And there is a whole subsection on off-site construction. The stuff in black here is currently there, but the intent is to add those case studies and methodologies for you, as well as some video from the event, et cetera, after we close the event in November and continue on that path in 2019 as well. We'll also learn some great things, I believe. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be visiting Knoxville for the Building Systems Summit. Margaret and Michael and I are all speaking at that event for NAHB. But we're also going to be touring the Clayton Homes factory there, and we have a few seats left on the bus. So if you haven't signed up yet, please let us know by the end of this week.
Literal bus.
It's literally a mini bus. If you came with us last time, don't worry, Michael and I aren't driving. We have a professional driver this time. But that's the afternoon of October 2nd. We're going to go to Branch Technology, which is a 3D printing company that's doing components in 3D for housing. And then the morning of the 3rd, we'll be at Clayton first at their factory, and then we'll be at one of their builders, who's also a member of ours, Goodall Homes, who they purchased to the production builder. And the Clayton folks will be telling us what their intent is to merge those two worlds together, so what their strategy is on that front. So certainly there's some off-site aspects to that as well, bringing the factory to the field. And then the summit is scheduled for April 2nd through 3rd in Scottsdale, so we'll continue this discussion there as well. Hopefully We've got some leads on some bigger builder case studies that we might be able to pull together by then. We'll keep you posted on that front, but hopefully we'll be able to do that. And then couldn't resist this photo. But we've done this year some research into what's going on in international markets, and we think we need to take our road tour overseas. So we believe the first stop is likely going to be Japan, and targeting summer of 2019, but we're still figuring out the logistics of that. But there's some very cool things that we can see between Sekisui and Panahome, both on the off-site construction side as well as Healthy Home and Smart Home over there also.
Michael again, I've been there 3 times over the years, and I'd encourage you, drop Betsy an email if you're interested, and we'll start to design what that could be. But how many people are we taking? And we're not driving this time.
No. Yeah, we're not driving this time. Okay, perfect. And I don't know that we have any closing thoughts, but if you do come up with something or ideas, as I said, just send them to me, or you can send them to Natalie. Natalie will be sending the follow-up materials out to you by email. So you'll get her email address then if you don't have it already. But just want to thank Margaret and George again today for helping lead this discussion, and also take the opportunity to share. Oh, there was a comment that came up, so I apologize for that. The Department of Energy is also looking, for those of you manufacturers on the phone, at applications for off-site construction, I believe, in retrofit. So that was Joan Glickman who posted that to us. Perhaps I'll shoot her an email and see if she's got any more information that we can share with you offline as well. But before we go, thanks again to our partners, and thanks again to the DOE for helping to support the benchmark research that we did earlier this year. And look for more information to come in the next several weeks, every week, about the event in November, and we hope to see you in Baltimore.
Thank you, Betsy, Natalie, team. Good job.
Great, thank you.